Today's lesson for me is very exciting. I think this may be one of the most important lessons that we go through in this series. I would say this kind of partnered with one of our earlier ones of Can I Trust the Bible? I think those two are probably the most important. And the reason that I would also just say that is that it's a little bit of a foreshadowing that in not next unit, but the unit after, so in a couple months, our project that we're doing for that class at the end of the year is a kind of like a trial, if you will. So students, we're going to be partnering you up in maybe put 2 tables together, something like that, have maybe 3 or 4 groups of you, probably 4. And as a group of students, you're going to come up with your court case argument for the jury of parents and me as the judge. And you're going to have to persuade and convince us that either the Bible is the Word of God, so that's kind of based off of that first earlier lesson, which if you want to recap on it before that time is online, and you have the notes, or you can choose to convince us that the resurrection actually happened. So those are the 2 things for our final project that you get to create an argument for and argue to the jury of your parents and convince all of your parents with the best arguments you can come up with based on the work that we already put into it. So that's going to be a really fun kind of interactive project in a couple units, but that's foreshadowing. The resurrection is important, though, because the Apostle Paul actually tells us that it is the basis of our faith, right? So Paul basically says, I'll paraphrase it, Paul basically says, if the resurrection didn't happen, we're all wrong. Like, Christianity is false if the resurrection didn't happen, right? It's just wishful thinking at that point. And the reason that Paul says that is because, well, what is the basis that we're saved? The crucifixion, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Like when we're baptized into the church, right? We are buried with Christ and resurrected with him. It's the central focal point of what we do. We meet on Sundays because Jesus resurrected on a Sunday. Right? We're celebrating the resurrection every single week when we come to church. The resurrection is central and key to everything it means to be a Christian. Your faith, your salvation, is fully hinged on the resurrection, right? The crucifixion of Jesus is what paid for the sin, if you will. It was the cash. The resurrection is the receipt. It's the proof of purchase. Hey, the purchase went through. Here's your proof of it. You can hold on to that now. The resurrection is vitally important to everything that it means to be a Christian. So, it makes sense then that it would be one of the most argued about things against the church, right? If people are trying to disprove Christianity or trying to convince someone not to be a Christian, they're going to try to punch at the resurrection. And as we learned about last week, right, there's archaeological evidence, there's extra-biblical evidence, there's manuscript evidence, all the evidences outside even the Bible, and prophetic evidences within the Bible to help us to see, okay, this is a trustworthy source that I can believe what it says. And no historian in their right mind who wants to be respected is going to try to tell you that Jesus wasn't a real person. Every historian is going to say, yeah, there was a guy in the 1st century whose name was Jesus, and he claimed to be the Messiah, and he was crucified, and they claimed that he rose from the dead. So that's the big, any historian will tell you that is truth. Historical fact. However, not every historian will tell you he did rise from the dead, right? They're going to say, well, there were claims about it, but they're not going to say he did it, unless they're Christians. Because if he rose from the dead, it's kind of a big deal, right? People will argue against this and say, well, people don't actually rise from the dead, My response to that is, yeah, that's why it was a really big deal when Jesus rose from the dead. It doesn't happen every day. Doesn't happen ever, really. And the only time it does happen is when Jesus is involved, either with himself or other people. So it is a big deal that someone's doing it. And the reason it's a big deal is because it doesn't happen every day. If it happened every day, who'd care, right? This is like a big moment in history. So they're going to come up with some theories as to how people maybe thought Jesus rose from the dead but didn't. So we're going to look at the 4 major theories against the resurrection this morning. And I'm just going to warn you now, these are the best arguments that we could find. And by we, I mean myself and the internet. But these are the best arguments that are out there. And they're kind of the solid pillar ones that are out there. And I'm not making that up because once we start looking at them, you're going to laugh. So here's the first theory. And I think this is probably the strongest theory, if you will, probably out of all of them. This is the swoon theory, right? Some people believe that Jesus was not really dead when he was put in the tomb. He just appeared dead. He swooned. He fainted, right? He passed out. Or he lost consciousness. And then 3 days later, when he gained his consciousness back, he rolled the stone away and walked free. Right? Makes sense, right? James?
First of all, the spear that the Roman
That's,
soldier
yep.
stabbed him with, and second of all, there was the big stone.
Yeah. So the first thing that we need to take into account with the swoon theory is the Gospels tell us that when Jesus was stabbed in the side, James, you hit the nail on the head. Jesus was stabbed in the side. He bled out blood mixed with water. You want to know why it's significant that he bled water?
Because then that means he had no more blood.
He had no more blood left. I don't know about you. Hard to live without blood, right? Yes. So point 1 would be the spear. Point 2 would be, yeah.
The stone is like really heavy.
The stone is massive. Like it's at least a ton, if not 2. There's a giant stone, and the stone is actually positioned on kind of a slope. There's like a sloping track for it. So he doesn't just have to push it to the side or down a hill. He actually has to be able to push this stone up a ramp. It's next to impossible to think that someone who's been unconscious for 3 days, hasn't eaten anything, hasn't had anything to drink, would be able to wake up in a very dark tomb, grab hold of a stone that's covering the entrance, that's 1 to 2 tons, and push it up a ramp. Doesn't sound likely to me. Does it sound likely to you?
Nope.
After he could not carry the cross.
Exactly. He couldn't even, yeah, he was so beaten that he couldn't carry his cross, right? His back was covered in, or he was whipped with a cat-o'-nine whip, which is like a whip that's got shards of glass and metal in it and stuff, chunking out his skin. It's brutal, yeah.
Doesn't it discount to the severity of crucifixion?
It totally does.
Is there any report of that actually occurring to anybody else who has ever been crucified?
No. I mean, so here's the thing, is crucifixion was created specifically to torture and kill people. Like, it was brutal, right? You think about, again, he's got whips, marks bleeding all down his back. Then they put that back on just a rough, probably very haphazardly cut piece of wood. And they nail him into it. And in order for him to take a breath, you know what he has to do? He has to pull himself up in order to breathe by the nails that are pierced into his hands or his wrists. He has to pull himself up by the nails to take a breath. So that pulling up then scratches his back more onto the cross. And he takes his breath and he has to hang back down. He's slowly suffocating to death because he doesn't have the strength or pain tolerance even to continue fighting that. I mean, this is like brutal stuff that the Romans did. Crucifixion's no laughing matter. It's a big deal. And I don't know if humans have ever created a more brutal way to kill somebody than crucifixion. So to think that he just swooned means that, okay, well, the Romans don't know what they're doing when they crucify this guy, which is totally not true. The fact that he bled water and blood, somehow he was still alive, which is impossible. And then he moves this giant stone out of the way, 1 to 2 tons, by himself. Not going to happen. So I would personally say swoon theory debunked, right? Do we feel confident with that? Okay, let's move on to the next one. The thief theory. Some people believe that Jesus' body stayed dead. Okay, so right now we're on the right track, right? But the explanation for the empty tomb would be that the disciples stole the body of Jesus in order to gain some sort of cultural or political power. Ha-ha!
Oh, yeah.
We stole the body, and now we've created our own religion, and we got it. James, what you got?
Weren't there accounts that the disciples were hiding?
So the disciples were all hiding because why? Why were they hiding?
They didn't want to also be. They didn't also want to get crucified.
Yeah, they were next on the list, right? Like, okay, we got the ringleader, now let's get all of his cronies, you know? Yeah.
Also, like, if they were going to steal his body, like, again, the stone was 2 tons to 1 ton. And they would have to, like, push it up with, and then, like, no one would have to see them as they're carrying Jesus out.
Right.
And the guards.
So that's the next point is the guards. So there was a constant rotation of, people believe, around 15 guards outside the tomb while Jesus was in it. 15 guards. Do you think you can sneak past 15 guards? No. And roll a giant 1 to 2 ton stone out of the way? Not a chance. And then sneak a body out that they're literally there to protect? Not going to happen. Right? Yeah.
And I also believe the Roman soldiers were under threat of death if their duty was not accomplished.
Yeah. So if the body was stolen, the soldiers were under threat of death, meaning that they could also be killed, potentially even crucified, for losing the body of Jesus. So do you think they would let it slide?
No.
I mean, what if they got like a good bribe, like 30 pieces of silver? I think we found out that was like $300. Yeah, something like that. We Googled it at the end of class last week. So what do we think? Do we think it's possible that the disciple, oh wait, also we got to talk about cultural and political power. That's the next big thing with the disciples.
Oh.
Right? Because, yeah.
They would not be able to share it with everybody.
Well, yeah, so they, like, did the disciples get any cultural or political power? No. They all got killed. Not right away, but over the course of time. Right? We have accounts of, I think we know what happened to almost all 12 of them, if not all 12. Crucified upside down, stoned to death.
Crucified upside down?
Yeah. Crucified, but your feet are at the top and your head's at the bottom.
So the blood all goes to the grave.
Just brutal stuff. So that to me doesn't sound like people who would get cultural or political power. The church didn't get any cultural or political power until 300 years, over 300 years after the resurrection. 300 years. So none of the disciples were alive for this time. None of their disciples were alive at this time. Right? You'd have to go back almost 4 to 5 generations until finally you have Constantine, who's the Roman emperor, who became a Christian, and he then kind of made Christianity a safe religion, if you will. But up until then, it was looked down upon. 300 years. That's not cultural or political power at all. So, what do we think? Do you think the thief theory holds any water?
No.
Nope. Next, hallucination theory. This is a good one, isn't it? Some people believe Jesus' disciples didn't really see the risen Jesus. They believe that the disciples experienced a group hallucination and envisioned a risen Jesus, but he still would have been dead. James, what you got for me? I love it.
She saw him too.
Okay, Mary saw him too. She wasn't in the upper room, so that'd be weird to have someone who's part of a group hallucination who's not in the group. So that's a good first point.
And he showed himself to a lot more people.
We have, Scripture tells us he appeared to up to 500 people in one sitting. Yeah. Yes?
Didn't he ask or show Simon Peter his wounds, and Simon Peter touched them and he felt the wounds?
Yeah. So that's a real good hallucination. If everyone's seeing it, and then one guy goes, "Let me touch it," and then he touches it, and goes, "Yeah, I touched it."
And when Jesus eats
Mm-hmm.
the fish.
Yeah, he eats with them. Yep. Also, this is probably just a good thing to point out. Group hallucination is not a thing. Like, you don't everyone has their own hallucinations, if you will. Like, there's not such a thing as having a whole group of people who all envision the same thing happening if it's not actually there. It's not a thing. It's like if we all came together this morning and said, "Oh, hey, did everyone else have the same dream last night?" And all of us had the exact same dream, like to a T. That doesn't happen. Group hallucination doesn't happen. So scientifically speaking, it's dumb to think that this happened. But also practically speaking, when you look at the accounts and the narratives and the things going on, the details going on, it doesn't make sense for it to have happened either. So I would say this theory, does this theory make any sense?
No.
Okay, people who believe it are hallucinating. Great. Next one, our fourth theory is the wrong tomb theory. Right? Classic. Some people believe Jesus' body stayed dead, and the disciples just went to the wrong tomb and assumed he rose from the dead. Classic. Right. Yeah, what we got? Yeah, so I'm guessing that there probably were not guards 24/7 guarding every single tomb in the area. So it'd be pretty hard to miss that. Ben?
Didn't Mary go and see where they laid him?
I believe so. I believe so. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
What's the name of the missing dead guy?
What's the name of the missing dead guy?
If it's a wrong tomb,
Uh-huh.
it's empty. Where's the missing dead guy and what's his name?
Oh, yeah. Where's the guy that would have been in there? Well, maybe it wasn't used yet.
He just disintegrated.
Or that. They cremated him. That's a good point, though, yeah.
You know, you buy somebody else's car and you get the wrong car. Well, whose car is it?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
somebody's. So whose tomb is it? Yeah. James, what do you got?
And didn't Mary also see the stone moved?
Yeah, I think
And-
they also would have seen the
and
stone moved away.
soldiers, didn't she also see the guards laying?
I think so. We have to double check
Or
this.
was
Maybe we
that-
do this during craft time. We
Or
double
was
check the
that
passages.
when-
That sounds right to me. That for sure, I feel like I recall the stone being rolled away because she thought that his body had been stolen.
Yeah, and
Wait,
if
which
it's
means
the
that means that God knew that people would say that, oh, the body was stolen, and he goes, I will just write that into the story. It wasn't stolen.
And why would the disciples go to the wrong tomb if they already knew where? Because weren't they one of the ones that watched them bring in?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, Mary followed them to where Jesus was buried, so they would have known which tomb it was.
Mary also told them which tomb.
Yeah. Yeah, and then Mary's the one who ran back to the disciples. She's the one who's like, hey, body's gone. Yeah.
Also, why would angels say that this was Jesus' tomb if it wasn't?
We got angels sitting at the tomb. Hey, this is the right tomb. Again, normally, angels sitting at a tomb, not happening at every tomb. Oliver.
Connected to the thief theory.
Huh?
Connected to the thief theory.
Connected to the thief theory? I think we did, right? Wouldn't be.
Oh, these two are related?
That they're related, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's either that they visited the right tomb and someone stole the body, or they visited the wrong tomb and the body's gone. That they're in a sense they're kind of flip-flop the same idea. Is that it? Okay. Yeah.
Whose tomb was it? That's specifically, it's Joseph,
Joseph of Arimathea. Yes.
and he was a rich man, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Who owned a tomb which rich people own
Mm-hmm.
already, and it was already hewn out of rock. So they knew this, and they knew who Joseph was, so I think they would have known
Yeah, so it's not just any old tomb, and if he's a wealthy guy, it's probably a pretty prominent tomb, right? Like it's something that, like, I don't know if this is fair to ask, but anyone ever been to a cemetery before? And like you see, maybe you drive, there's one on Cascade Road that we always drive past when you go to Little Caesars down there to get pizza, 'cause that's a good Little Caesars in town. Y'all know what I'm talking about. There's the cemetery there, and you see, right, some of the tombstones are smaller and, you know, not quite as well kept, and then some of them look like these mausoleums. Like there's like a little building on top of the person and stuff, right? So Joseph probably had, since he was so wealthy, probably had a more prominent tomb, if you will, to put it as a one-to-one to modern day. Something that was recognizable. Yeah, probably. Maybe his stone was carved. This Arimathea's. That's not their last name, but you know. Yeah, a big A, monogrammed on the stone. That's missing from my resurrection eggs. James.
And Mary also saw the clothes.
Yeah, and she saw the linens are reported to be in the tomb, folded nicely. Okay, so if someone's, again, if Jesus swooned, well, he wouldn't have the energy to nicely fold up all of his linens. If his body was stolen, well, why would they fold up the linens nicely and put them back in there? Yeah, you're frantic, right? You're in and out. You're not taking time to fold stuff and make it look good. And then if you're in the wrong tomb, why are there folded linens in the wrong tomb? Yeah.
We bury people, we write their names, right?
Yeah.
It says the tomb is sealed.
Yeah.
I don't know what the culture was 2,000 years ago, but could that seal have the name?
It could. So yeah, you almost think of like, I guess it makes sense because we're doing Esther on Wednesday nights, but Xerxes always has his signet ring that he uses to seal an order or a decree. So it could be sealed as enclosed. Yeah, so it could have been sealed as enclosed. It could have been sealed as in an insignia was put on it. Marked, yeah. Yes.
Also, like Mary saw him first, so this doesn't really connect. Because in the Bible, Mary Magdalene was the first one, like when he came out of the cave. I think she was heading to it or something. Or something, or he walked by.
Yeah.
He's like, "Go tell all my disciples and everyone you've seen that I've risen."
Yeah.
And so the disciples couldn't, because they were also hiding.
Right.
So they couldn't have went to the wrong tomb.
Yeah. So if the disciples were trying to, pull a fast one on the world, why would you write the story down that a woman gets to the tomb first? Because culturally speaking, in first century Middle Eastern world, a woman's word was not as strong as a man's word. And so if they had a woman come and report, hey, this is what we found, more people were likely to go, yeah, right. But that's how the Gospels reported it. This is what happened. That's not a detail that you would lie about, right? If you wanted to make a believable story, you'd have, Peter, the rock of the church. He's the guy who found the empty tomb. He's a trustworthy source, right? So they wrote out the truth, and they didn't write out a story. Yeah, Zeke.
Also, if the body was stolen, then wouldn't the owners just like bring the body out and be like, "Here's the body"?
Sure. Yeah, if the body was stolen, well, where's the body? Here it is. We found it. It would have shown up eventually, right? Like, you can't hide a dead body forever. Then you'd figure out the right tomb over time. Yeah. Yeah. In the right tomb. And we still haven't found that right tomb. So when I was in high school, I went on a trip to Israel, and we went to 2 locations in Israel. One is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the other is the Garden Tomb. So those are 2 locations that people believe Jesus was buried. Now, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre also believes that they have the location of the crucifixion and the burial, because they were, to be fair, pretty close to one another. You wouldn't want to drag dead bodies super far, so you'd crucify them close to where you're going to bury them. Makes sense. Just outside of town. So we visited the church. One, that's the Catholic, predominantly Catholic view of where Jesus was crucified and buried. And there's an empty kind of chamber, and that's the tomb. It's an empty chamber. And you go into it, and there's a stone there, and a lot of people will venerate it. They'll go and they'll lay their hands on the stone or whatever. Then you also go to the garden tomb. So we went to both. The garden tomb is the other place that they think it could have been. And they've got, I don't think that they've got the Golgotha right there. I think it's outside of it, but it's, again, relatively close. And we go into the tomb, and, it's empty as well. And I think it was the person at the garden tomb told us, there's a lot of arguing back and forth about which location was Jesus actually buried at. Was he buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? Was he buried at the garden tomb? And people back and forth fight about it all the time. And the lady working there said, what's important? What's important isn't where he was buried. What's important is the fact that he's not here anymore. Isn't that true? Right? We haven't found the body. He's not there. He's risen. And that's why we actually can have our faith. That's why we can actually trust and believe in God, because nobody that I know has been able to raise themselves from the dead. Only Jesus. That's why he's a big deal. That's why he's worth putting our faith in. So, we'll take a couple of minutes and talk amongst our tables about this question. What do you think about the resurrection now? What do you think about this? Because, again, if Paul puts all the authority of his faith on the resurrection, we should probably be thinking about this a little bit and be able to say, without a doubt, Jesus rose from the dead. So let's talk about it. I feel like there were some really good thoughts out there that I was hearing. Anyone want to share anything? Yes?
Well, I think since all these things have something to do with that one thing that throws it off, I think they're called arguments or something like that.
The theories?
Theories,
Yeah.
that throw these theories off, and one, the folded clothes, and then two, it's the stone is 200, two tons, and this could only mean one thing, that each of these is thrown off, so it only really is possible that God did it and came in and rose him from the dead. That's really the only thing that makes sense.
So that's the crazy thing, is that you sit there and you look at all these theories and go, the most logical explanation for this is that Jesus rose from the dead.
Yeah, even if you're not even a Christian and you're a scientist or something like that, and you're looking at these and you're we could probably the only one that's really real is
Yeah.
really rose from the dead.
Yeah. Even if you're sitting there going, people don't rise from the dead. Yeah, but this one did. That's the explanation that I can think of. Yeah. Garrett.
So, Ben and Abel and I were kind of talking, and I thought, well, maybe the disciples didn't hallucinate Jesus, but what if they just lied and pretended that he was resurrected when they didn't? And they kind of pointed out, they still wouldn't gain anything from doing that. Also, the hundreds of people who saw him probably didn't hear their theoretical plan to all pretend that he was resurrected.
Yeah.
It would be easy to disprove if it were just a lie. You'd go get the body.
Yeah, you just, okay, let's roll over the, okay.
The best evidence he was still dead.
Rome could have crushed Christianity like that if it was a lie. Yeah. It's good points.
I would have wanted to be martyred for something I knew wasn't true.
Yeah. So that's they were brutally martyred. Again, like the Roman Empire, they knew how to kill people. They did not hold back. Yeah.
Well, also, the guards that were there, they were threatened to get killed, and I think the angel was so bright that it knocked them out. And if they had any time to look, I think that they would knew that's nothing else. That wasn't any of those theories. That was the Son of God. So they would go to a pilot or whoever the commander was, and he
Yeah, like imagine that word getting back to Pilate. That innocent guy that you killed, he rose from the dead. Like his tomb is empty. And he's talking to people, walking around town. Like that would blow my mind if I were him. Yeah, Ben.
1 Corinthians 15, I'm sure you're familiar with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he's Paul is talking to people in the Corinthian church that have like given up on believing in the resurrection because they're believing, the critics or the skeptics. And Paul says, look, this was my whole message to you, is that Christ not only was he crucified, but he was raised from the dead. And then he says, and I'll just put it in my own words, okay? I'll summarize it. And if you don't believe me, go to Jerusalem. There's like 500 people there that are willing to tell you that. 500 people there that saw him. If you don't believe me, just go to Jerusalem. Just go ask any of them.
Yeah.
You're going to find that many liars.
So it's the same idea we talked about with, well, can I trust the Bible? It was written while the people were alive who experienced this stuff, right? Like if Paul is writing all this stuff about Jesus rising from the dead, we would also then have books or articles or things written to the contrary of that saying, no, that's actually not true, and I was there, and I saw it, and none of this happened, and you'd get that prevailing message probably from the Roman Empire. They wouldn't let this fringe religious group pop up and change the world.
And again, I think we have to consider the fact that Jesus was crucified, and including the disciples, they were terrified.
Mm-hmm.
People were not like, oh yeah, let's go along with this new religion. This seems really happy, and
Yeah.
nobody's going to get killed.
Yeah.
The Romans had a very tight rule over the people. And, you can see that in the book of Acts where I think it's chapter 17 after, I can't remember exactly, but they have a riot that starts. And the leaders of that particular town, they quiet it down. I think it was Ephesus. And they're like, they're going to come and they're going to take care of us if you guys don't knock this off.
As great as Artemis of the Ephesians, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and they were just, people were afraid, and so they weren't just going to go along with this unless they actually saw him walking around for 40 days.
Yeah.
Post-resurrection, by the way. It wasn't just for,
It wasn't just right then.
for a couple
Yeah.
minutes. Yeah.
So this is big. And then, again, the first 300 years of the church, up until Constantine, it wasn't really socially acceptable to be a Christian. Maybe there wasn't laws specifically maybe saying that Christians ought to be persecuted and killed and stuff, but it was happening because people didn't like them. So people were not gaining stuff from this. This wasn't popular. And I was even saying, even when Constantine became emperor, I think only 10% of the empire was Christian. So it wouldn't make sense for him to just fake it either. So anyway, all that being said, I think Jesus rose from the dead. I hope you think that too. And I hope that you feel at least more confident to say, yes, Jesus rose from the dead. And if someone were to come up to you and say, I don't think so, hopefully you're a little bit more equipped, like James, to be able to combat that.